5 minutes ago, something happened that most people will misunderstand at first glance because on the surface, it looked like a simple diplomatic scheduling issue. The kind that gets quietly resolved behind closed doors, explained away with polite statements and vague references to timing conflicts. Before we roll the footage, just one thing. If you enjoy our work, drop a like and hit subscribe. Over 98% of you are watching without subscribing. Let's change that right now. It's free for you, but it fuels everything we do. Subscribed? Perfect. Now enjoy the video. But what actually unfolded was something far more deliberate, far more strategic and far more consequential than any official briefing is willing to admit, because Donald Trump did not just decline a meeting with Europe's most powerful woman. He sent a message so clear, so calculated and so public that it has already begun to reshape the balance of power across the Western alliance in ways that are only now starting to become visible. What makes this moment so explosive is not the rejection itself, but the contrast that surrounded it. Because while one of the most powerful figures in global politics was left waiting without acknowledgement, another European leader was already inside, already engaged, already building a direct line of influence that bypassed the very institutional structure that has defined transatlantic relations for decades. And that single contrast has triggered a wave of quiet panic inside diplomatic circles, where officials are now scrambling to understand whether they are witnessing a temporary disruption or the beginning of a permanent realignment. To understand why this moment matters so much, you have to look beyond the optics and into the underlying tension that has been building for months between Washington and Brussels. A tension rooted not in personalities, but in fundamentally different visions of how power should be exercised in the modern world. Because on one side, you have a centralised model that concentrates authority within a supranational framework designed to speak with one voice on behalf of an entire continent, while on the other side, you have a leader who has consistently rejected that model in favour of direct bilateral relationships that allow for faster decisions, clearer accountability and greater strategic flexibility. That clash of visions has been simmering beneath the surface for a long time. But it intensified dramatically in recent months as European leadership began pushing for greater strategic autonomy, openly discussing the need to reduce dependence on American leadership in areas ranging from defence to trade. And while those discussions were framed publicly as necessary evolution in a changing geopolitical landscape, they were interpreted very differently inside Washington, where officials began to see them not as cooperation, but as competition, not as partnership, but as positioning for independence. According to sources familiar with internal deliberations, this perception shift played a critical role in shaping the decision that unfolded today, because it reframed the relationship in a way that made traditional diplomatic engagement less appealing and direct engagement with individual leaders more advantageous, effectively turning the existing system on its head and creating an environment in which access is no longer guaranteed by position, but earned through alignment. The immediate reaction to this shift has been intense and in some cases deeply revealing, because while official statements have emphasised continuity and mutual respect, the underlying reality is that governments across Europe are now reassessing their strategies in real time, weighing the benefits of maintaining a unified front against the risks of being excluded from direct channels of communication that are rapidly becoming more influential than the structures they were designed to complement. Media coverage has added another layer of complexity, with major outlets offering sharply different interpretations of the same event. Some framing it as a temporary diplomatic misstep, while others describe it as a turning point that could redefine the entire architecture of transatlantic relations. And in between those narratives are a handful of analysts who have begun to ask a more uncomfortable question, which is whether the system itself is still capable of functioning effectively under the pressure of these competing approaches to power. Public reaction has been equally fragmented, with social media amplifying both outrage and scepticism in equal measure. creating a feedback loop that is further complicating the political response because leaders are now operating in an environment where every move is instantly scrutinised, every statement dissected, and every perceived weakness magnified, and making it increasingly difficult to project stability at a time when stability is exactly what is needed. Behind the scenes, however, the conversation is far more urgent and far less controlled because this moment has exposed a vulnerability that cannot easily be dismissed, namely the possibility that centralised authority may no longer guarantee access to the most important decision-making arenas. And if that perception takes hold, it could trigger a cascade of strategic adjustments that gradually erode the cohesion that has been a defining feature of European politics for decades. Economic implications are already being discussed, particularly in the context of potential trade tensions that could escalate if communication channels remain strained because without consistent high-level engagements, our misunderstandings can harden into policy, and policy can quickly translate into actions that have real consequences for industries, workers and markets on both sides of the Atlantic, turning what might have been a manageable disagreement into a full-scale confrontation. At the same time, defence coordination is emerging as another area of concern, as questions are raised about how effectively joint strategies can be maintained in the absence of clear and consistent leadership alignment, especially in a geopolitical environment that is already marked by uncertainty and shifting alliances, where even small disruptions can have outsized effects on stability. What makes this situation particularly volatile is the speed at which it is evolving. Because traditional diplomatic processes are not designed to adapt quickly to sudden changes in access and influence, and yet that is exactly what is happening, forcing leaders to make decisions under pressure with incomplete information and limited time, increasing the likelihood of miscalculation at a moment when precision is critical. The woman at the centre of this storm now faces a challenge unlike any she has encountered before, because this is not a crisis that can be managed through internal coordination or strategic messaging alone. It is a crisis of recognition, a test of whether the authority she represents is still acknowledged by the most powerful actors in the system. And without that recognition, even the most carefully constructed policies risk losing their impact. Her response in the coming days will be closely watched. Not just for its immediate effect, but for what it signals about the future direction of European leadership, because she must now navigate a path that balances the need to defend institutional integrity with the practical necessity of maintaining influence in an environment that is rapidly changing around her. Meanwhile, other leaders are already moving, some quietly strengthening bilateral ties, others publicly calling for unity while privately exploring alternatives, creating a complex and fluid landscape in which alliances are being tested and priorities recalibrated, often simultaneously and sometimes in contradiction with one another. All of this points to a deeper transformation that may already be underway, and one that extends beyond any single decision or individual and speaks to a broader shift in how power is organised and exercised in the international system, a shift that could redefine not only relationships between nations, but the very structures through which those relationships are managed. The critical question now is whether this transformation will be gradual and controlled or abrupt and destabilising, because the difference between those outcomes will determine not only the trajectory of transatlantic relations, but the stability of the global order more broadly. And right now the signals are mixed, offering both reasons for caution and cause for concern. As analysts continue to debate the implications and policymakers work to contain the fallout, one thing is becoming increasingly clear, which is that this moment cannot simply be ignored or explained away, because it has revealed underlying tensions that will need to be addressed sooner rather than later. And the longer those tensions remain unresolved, the greater the risk that they will manifest in ways that are far more difficult to manage. So the world is watching, waiting, and asking the same set of questions that are now echoing through the halls of power on both sides of the Atlantic. questions about access, authority and alignment, questions about whether the systems that have defined an era are still fit for purpose, and questions about who will shape whatever comes next. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all is this: if a single decision can trigger this level of uncertainty, what happens if it is followed by another and another and another, and until what once seemed unthinkable becomes the new normal? And the balance of power shifts not with a dramatic Goshenah, but with a series of quiet, irreversible steps that only reveal their full impact when it is already too late to turn back. If you want to stay ahead of that shift and understand what these moments really mean before they are fully visible to the rest of the world, make sure you are paying attention, because the next development is already unfolding. And when it breaks, it may not just confirm what we are seeing now, it may redefine it entirely.